The Phantom Menace. Yep, this is a very controversial movie. I think this is probably my maybe like third least favorite. I think Attack the Clones and Rise of Skywalker like ranked below this one, but it's definitely kind of in like the lower tier of movies for me for obvious reasons. Right when this movie was like coming out, like again, like I was only like 6 years old when this movie came out, so I wasn't really quite into the fandom as much. But I know a lot of people who grew up with the original trilogy were like so looking forward to this movie. It was like the most hyped film of like all time when it was coming out, because obviously the original trilogy was just so good, like part of people's childhoods and this pop culture phenomenon. So expectations were like exponential when Phantom Menace was being in production. And the reason why George Lucas wanted to make this movie, when he was making the original Star Wars, he had kind of like the backstory for what happened beforehand. He didn't really have any intention of actually making it, just because it would have like a lot of production values and a lot of visual effects and everything. But then once Jurassic Park came out, he was very much inspired to go back into the backstory and write the prequels and everything. The 1st November 1994, you can see like the behind the scenes of Phantom Menace, him like typing on his computer and like writing different notes and stuff for it. And then eventually, Phantom Menace was released, and yeah, it was a little bit of a disappointment, to say the least. But anyway, to get into it, kind of starts off with Star Wars and, the opening crawl and everything. So people were like really excited about that. But then, the opening crawl talks about, the taxation of like trade routes and everything. You're just like, wait, what was happening? And then classic pan down to the ship, and you see qui-gon and Obi-Wan kind of on that mission to negotiate with the Neimoidians to kind of end the taxation of trade routes to the planet of Naboo. And yeah, kind of right from the beginning, this is very much like sort of like lifeless in a way. The performances are kind of flat. The music is a little bit flat. The filmmaking, it's not really dynamic in a way. I mean, it does kind of pick up a little bit, with like the droid Dekaz coming out and like trying to kill the Jedi and everything, because negotiations like obviously failed with the Neimoidians. Like I just wish there was like a little bit more like a balance. Like I wish we had kind of like those dynamic performances from the original trilogy in this one, because everything just seems like just very flat. Like obviously that's kind of like the big kind of controversy about this movie, is that everything just feels really like lifeless. The visual effects are pretty great, but just like the performances, the acting, the writing, the direction, it's just not really all that great. And I think because like George Lucas, when he was writing the prequels, he was really much kind of wanting to reach out to different filmmakers to kind of take over, but all of them were saying like, no, George, I really think like you should do this because this is really your vision. And George Lucas had like that very long hiatus of not directing anything since A New Hope. And so I'm sure like this was kind of him trying to get back into writing and directing and everything. Even when he made A New Hope, like he wasn't really like the best director or everything. All the direction he would say is like, faster and more intense. And, like you can like read like interviews and stuff. Like he was definitely not very much like an actor's director. He would just like say, hey, I wrote it right there. Just do that. You can see like the behind the scenes of like, Harrison Ford saying, yeah, you can't just do that and make it work. So yeah, I can definitely see like why, it was definitely like a struggle for the actors to really get into their roles in this one, and really to help George Lucas, make his vision, come to life. And, I feel like a lot of people didn't really challenge him on his vision as much as they could have with this one, and proof's in the pudding with it. I wish I could say he kind of improved for Attack the Clones, but I can't really say that. But anyway, back to, Phantom Menace. So the battle droids go after the Jedi. They escape onto a Naboo on one of the transports as they're kind of invading Theed Palace. They kind of end up in the forest of Naboo, and they meet up with Jar Jar Binks, and another controversial character, which a lot of people say he's kind of like a Rastafarian stereotype. I don't really see him as a stereotype. I just mostly see him just kind of as an annoying character. I know George Lucas was trying to have like a funny character in Star Wars, in the vein of like C-3PO and like R2-D2, like the comedic characters, but I think he kind of just overdid it a little bit with Jar Jar Binks. And I know he's supposed to be playing like the buffoon character, and he's supposed to kind of have like an arc in the movie where he's very much at the beginning, very much like the buffoon, tripping over himself and creating all this chaos within his home world and everything. And then at the end of it, becomes like a general and all that, where he still kind of fumbles his way through. But yeah, I think George kind of just overdid it with his character, and I can definitely understand the hate for him, which is probably why he got reduced in Attack the Clones significantly and in Revenge of the Sith. But yeah, I mean, hey, what can you do? So yeah, they meet up with Jar Jar Binks. They go down into like the Gungan City and meet up with Boss Nass because they need to get to Naboo. So they get onto a ship, one of the water ships, and then they go through of the planet core and meet up with all these different monsters and get away. And they finally get to the other side, into the palace, rescue the queen. They get onto one of her ships, the classic battle droids, Roger Roger. They get past the battle droids, they come down like butter, which I guess, George Lucas intended for them, because he's obviously going to be setting up the events in Attack the Clones, where they need an army of the Republic and they need, someone to take on all these battle droids and everything. But anyway, yeah, they get onto the ship and they fly off through the blockade. The hyperdrive gets shot, even though all the Astro droids and where R2-D2 is, introduced, try to help out, but he helps them, gets shields up, and they fly past the blockade, but the hyperdrive is still leaking, so they have to land on a planet to repair and fuel the ship. Obi-Wan finds Tatooine. They go to not Mos Eisley, but Mos Espa, and they meet up with young Anakin Skywalker, which is another kind of, I guess, controversial character. I think George Lucas was originally wanting him to be a little bit older, have him be like a teenager, but he wanted to have like the separation between him and his mom to be more dramatic, so he made him 9 years old, which is like, eh. And then you can see like on the behind the scenes of Phantom Menace when he's casting, there's obviously a child actor who's like so much better than Jake Lloyd, who he could have went with, but he went with Jake Lloyd because I guess he's a little bit more unpredictable and everything, and not the best actor. And then now you can kind of see where his career went because so many people hated on Jake Lloyd's performance, which I don't think is like horrible. It's just between like the two actors that he could have chosen that first actor who was definitely a lot better acting than Jake Lloyd. But anyway, so they find young Anakin Skywalker. They try to make a deal with Watto to get the part for the hyperdrive. Qui-gon tries to do like the whole Jedi mind trick, but since Watto's a Toydarian, doesn't work on him, so they have to turn back and go back to the ship and try to find another place to get a part. And right when they're kind of like looking around and everything, Jar Jar being Jar Jar is like trying to get that kind of like frog food stuff. He shoots his tongue at it, and once he finds out the price for it, he's like whoopee, and he throws it, hits Sebulba. Sebulba obviously gets angry, tries to choke out Jar Jar. Anakin comes in and tells him off, and they find out that there's like a sandstorm coming, so Anakin decides to take him back to his home so they can like wait out the sandstorm and everything. And then that's when they meet his mom, Shmi Skywalker. They talk about pod racing and how Anakin's like the only one who can do it, and Qui-Gon senses that he's force sensitive and everything. They kind of make this arrangement of if Anakin wins the pod race, then they can like win the part, and then possibly Anakin can be free. The next day they go to Watto's place and make this deal. So then we get the whole like pod race sequence, which was obviously inspired by Ben-Hur, the whole chariot race scene, which I think the pod race scene is actually pretty cool. A lot of people like criticize because it just kind of stops the story, and it's just kind of like this whole big visual effects phenomenon. But I remember, when that was coming out, like that was like a big deal and everything. I remember like kind of the arcade game where you're kind of in the pod racer, flying it and everything. So I appreciate it. I think it's like a really cool sequence, and it's kind of like essential. It kind of shows Anakin being force sensitive and being the only human who could pod race. So yeah, they have like the 3 laps, and Sebulba being Sebulba pretty much like cheats and gets rid of all the other pod racers. He almost gets rid of Anakin, but then Anakin, being a little genius, is able to kind of get through it, and then gets past Sebulba in like the final lap, and wins the pod race, wins his freedom. They're able to get the part that they need, and Qui-Gon tries to negotiate with Watto to get Shmi Skywalker free, but things didn't really work out. So then it's just Anakin who has to be the one who kind of leaves, and then we get that whole emotional sequence of him leaving his mom, and that'll obviously lead into the events of Attack the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. So then they fly off back to Naboo. Now they have the part they need, and we kind of get into like the drag of the movie where Anakin's with the Jedi Council and they don't trust him because he's 9 years old, and they sense the dark side of him. Yoda, puppet Yoda is all like, fear leads to anger leads to hate leads to suffering. So we get that whole scene, and then we have the whole sequence of like the Queen negotiating what they should be doing about the taxation of the trade routes with the Neimoidians on Naboo, and Chancellor Valorum, the vote of no confidence to kind of get him kicked out, and then have a new chancellor in his place, which we get introduced to the character of Palpatine, who's secretly the Emperor. Spoiler alert. This is kind of like his start to his rise of power within the Senate. So we kind of have these two kind of juxtapositions going on, but then towards the end, everything kind of gets resolved. Qui-Gon goes against the council and decides to train Anakin himself, even though he has Obi-Wan as his apprentice already, but he wants to kind of go behind his back. So he's like talking with Anakin, just like I know I'm not allowed to train you, but I want you to watch my movements and like see how everything goes. And then on the flip side, Chancellor Valorum is kind of kicked out of the Senate, and then Palpatine is kind of nominated nominated as a chancellor instead of being a senator. And the queen decides to actually go back to Naboo and kind of like fight for, her freedom of her people essentially, and, kind of like, go around like the Senate's back and like just do things herself. So then we kind of get into like the third act where we kind of get the 4 different storylines, which is definitely an issue. But, when George Lucas was actually editing, him and his editor Ben Burt were just like, oh, there's just so much going on. You can't really take anything out without like jumping and like having things like not make sense and everything. So we have our 4 storylines. We have Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan going after Darth Maul, who's the apprentice of Darth Sidious, who is secretly Palpatine, wanting to have Revenge of the Sith. So they're having their whole lightsaber duel. And then we have the Queen kind of like in the palace trying to go through the different parts of it in order to find the Viceroy and capture him. And then we have Anakin in the battle in the sky. He, kind of bumbles his way into one of those N1 fighters and somehow starts the ship up. He's trying to like, destroy all the battle droids and everything. And then he kind of flies off into like the sky battle. And then we have the ground battle with Jar Jar and Boss Nass and Captain Tarpals with the other Gungans going against the battle droids, kind of lead them away from the city. Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon have their duel with Darth Maul. Darth Maul slays down Qui-Gon. Obi-Wan goes after him and then he kills him off, slices him in half, and then he's dead until Clone Wars. The Queen finally gets into the chambers and like captures the Viceroy. Anakin kind of goes into the battle droid control ship, destroys the core, and then the battle droids get shut down on the ground where Jar Jar Binks and the rest of the Gungans are fighting, so they're all shut down, and then everything's all good. And then we kind of get to like the epilogue where Obi-Wan is accepted to be Anakin's master, and he becomes a Jedi Knight himself instead of being a Padawan learner. And then we have like the whole funeral scene of like Qui-Gon, being burnt and everything. And then we have, the very end sequence, echo to A New Hope, of like the whole like celebration and everything. Palpatine's like the new chancellor. The Queen finally has her freedom in Naboo. They had their whole like resolution with the Gungans. Now the Gungans are finally at peace with the people of Naboo, and everything's all good. And yeah, I haven't seen this movie in theaters, but I know like a lot of people like watch this movie over and over and over and over and over again in theaters because like they're like, oh, maybe it wasn't good the first time, maybe it'd be better the second time, and their positivity for it kind of kept going down and down and down, and until eventually we kind of are where we are right now, where it's probably like one of the most hated Star Wars movies until Attack of the Clones, which a lot of people hate even more. But I mean, hey, it made tons of money, became one of the highest grossing Star Wars movies, kind of like allowed George Lucas to, I guess, see things that he could improve on for the continuing prequels. We got Clone Wars out of it. We got introduced the character of Darth Maul, which we got to continue on in Clone Wars, which is awesome. But yeah, overall, like a lot of people feel like you can kind of skip Phantom Menace and then just kind of go on to Attack the Clones and, Revenge of the Sith, which I can totally see. Once we get to Attack the Clones, there's like that 10-year time jump, and, a lot of characters that were introduced in Phantom Menace aren't really in Attack the Clones. It's really kind of like its own story. So I can see like why people hate on this movie. I don't hate it, but it's definitely not my favorite Star Wars movie, and there's some essential elements in it, but it's definitely very skippable, and there's a lot of like kind of like cringeworthy stuff. But yeah, it's it is what it is. It has some cool action sequences. The lightsaber duel between Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon, and Darth Maul is really cool. The sky battle is really cool. This pod race is cool too. But yeah, overall, it's just like, yeah, the characters aren't really great. The writing isn't that great, and the direction's like kind of hit or miss. So yeah, that's kind of like my overall thoughts on the movie. But hey, get on to Attack the Clones, and yeah, it doesn't really get that much better.